Hello, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. Another exciting adventure and romp through a Brady episode. This one promises a very famous young guest star. I'm Barry Williams.
And I'm Christopher Knight.
And we are
The Real Brady Bros.
This was such a treat to go back through. I was in not a lot of this episode and actually wasn't even around when our guest star made his very famous appearance on the show. I was trying to think of how many other big guest stars we had in the first season, which this show is from. Wes Parker, I think, was in first season.
He was.
Do you remember any besides? Any come to mind?
From the first season? No.
Yeah, so I think maybe it was kind of setting a trend. Anyway, tell us about this episode, Chris. So when it came in and what number and when it aired.
The episode that we're going over today is The Possible Dream from season 1. First aired February 27th, 1970. It was the 22nd episode of season 1. It was directed by Oscar Rudolph, written by Al Schwartz and Bill Friedman. Now, Al was Sherwood's cousin, brother, uncle. He wasn't.
I think cousin, and I really don't know. Right. We would have to research that. Related, I think that Al and Sherwood did a lot of writing together, and we see Al's name come up several times, particularly in the first season, because as we've discussed, I think many of the first shows, at least the first half of the season, were already mapped out on the.
But I don't know if the 20s. This has a production number of 24, which would mean that it was right near the end. We did 20. It was a pilot and 24 episodes, so 25 episodes, I believe, in the first season. But episode production number 24 means that it was in the latter part of that first season, very latter part of that first season. Right. Those episodes, I'm not sure, were part of the first 13 that were pre-written. Right. Because you wouldn't have written them not knowing you would ever have a chance to put them in front of a camera.
Yeah, I was just making the point that Al was very, very evident. He and Bill Friedman were very evident in that first season.
Right. He had to have written or partially written at least a dozen.
So, shall we let the cat out of the bag and tell everyone who our very famous guest star was?
Go right ahead.
Desi Arnaz Jr., who had a long history at Paramount Studios because Paramount was RKO, and the original Lucy show, was done there at RKO. And then at one point, Lucy and Desi bought it, and that ultimately evolved into Paramount Studios, and somewhere along the line, Desi Arnaz Jr. was born. Now, wait a sec, wasn't he born when they were still back in New York? Didn't they do the I Love Lucy show in New York? Yeah, I think that was an actor that played Desi's the boy though. Not Desi. Jr.
You know something? Our public is going to have to correct us if they know differently than we do. I always assumed it was him, but it might not have been. But I think by the time they came out, and it was Desilu that was next to that the studio became.
Yeah, Desilu Studios.
Desilu Studios. It happened to back up against Paramount Studios lot. Eventually, they would coalesce into one studio, becoming Paramount.
Well, in watching this episode, you would think that Desi was quite a bit older than me. But he really isn't. I was
floored
3
by
years
that too. I mean,
3-4 years most.
He looks no more than a young 19. I mean,
19,
like if
18,
he was young
19,
for his age, like he couldn't have been older than 19. He could have been just 17. And how old were you in this episode? 14. You were 14 in this episode.
No,
this is first year. 70?
14. So you still would have been, well, it depends. If it was after September, I would have been 15.
But yeah, it struck me. It's just how youthful he looked and how present he was, how good he was, actually. And got me thinking, he was a big star. The way that young big stars are treated today are completely different than back then.
Yeah.
It wasn't as easy to leverage your family name, although the Douglases would do it and others, and it becomes more frequent as the years have passed along. But he was good enough to have his own series, and I don't believe he ever did, and I'm not sure why, other than maybe that wasn't his interest. He was quite good in this episode. I mean,
yes. Although I must say that frankly, he had nothing to do.
Right, and that's when it's hardest. But that's when it's hardest.
It was, I felt the whole thing felt that scene, that he only had the one scene, and it felt a little bit forced all the way around between Carol and Marcia and Desi.
Speaking of forced, I noticed something in this episode that I will lay at the feet of Oscar Rudolph. Maureen was a terrific actress, has always been, even when she was young, like you and Eve had a unique
There's
range,
a subtext going on, yeah.
Right, life. But in this episode, I can almost hear my delivery, and so I'm going to assume that was Oscar Rudolph's "up, up, up," because even Maureen got 2 shouting lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know Maureen to have done that, so I'm watching it going, it has to be an Oscar Rudolph affectation, because I didn't know what to do when he said "up, up, up." In my mind, it just meant talking louder and faster or something.
That's exactly what it meant. Energy is what he's talking about. Energy, bring it up, Mickey Rooney style. So this episode follows this theory that we have been discussing over the past several weeks, which is the camera's first going to find the character that the show will be about. But before we get
with
there,
that character, that's Barry's theorem.
I did want to mention that the first shot is a pan across the backyard, and apparently in this backyard, nobody in the Brady Bunch family knew how to use the kickstand on a bicycle, because there are 3. There are 3 bikes on their sides on the AstroTurf, and there are another 3 hula hoops that are like scattered about, which is supposed to, I guess, represent the pandemonium of having 6 children. And then it continues to pan over into the carport, where we see Marcia kind of hiding off by herself, although it's impossible to hide anywhere on that set or in that house, and reading her diary.
So I've got a question for you before we go on with the plot. So that pan, and now I can't recall exactly what was other than the bikes and the hula hoops in that pan, because I believe something was missing in that pan. But the reason for the pan was because of Desi Arnaz, we had an extra credit that had to be given up front. So the pan was to take the time from the
just opening up
the
on
opening
the
of
character.
the house, and then we come into the backyard, and the camera's panning for over 5 or 6 seconds to allow for the time for the credits to roll. One extra credit was special guest star Desi Arnaz Jr. But I don't remember seeing the tree in that pan. And if it comes from the swing set over to the garage, you would very definitely see a tree that was conveniently planted in the early episodes. And I know it wasn't in all episodes.
Maybe it was off having its leaves painted.
It didn't come back, I think, in the second season. And apparently it wasn't completely in the first season. It went the way of Tiger.
Yeah, and his doghouse stayed there all 5 seasons, even though the dog apparently stayed in it for all 5 seasons. Are you a guy? Did you ever keep a diary?
Never. I mean, in this episode, it's very clear that boys don't jot down their romantic wanderings. Exploits.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
So I was going to ask you whether a diary truly, because it's depicted in this episode of The Possible Dream, this is something girls do. And I never kept a diary. And I wouldn't assume that only girls do it, but I'm not sure how many guys who do it talk about it. So, yeah, I guess in my mind has always been painted, if there's a hand writing in a diary, it's a woman's hand.
So there's nobody here, right? It's just you and me talking.
It's just us 2 bros.
Yeah. Well, I prefer to call it a journal, but it was still the same thing. But yeah, I wrote down conversations of what I was doing and where I was, even the places where I wasn't supposed to be doing the things that I wasn't supposed to be doing. And this was very, very fertile when my mother decided to check in and see how my life was going.
So let me guess,
there was 11 years old.
There might have been a part of you that did want it to be discovered.
No, not in my consciousness anywhere.
But
no, there was a part of me that thought I was going to someday be 40 years old, and that it might be fun to go back and see what I was thinking about when I was 10. That was what all I was thinking about. I know it led to a major argument between my mother and I.
And your mom read this when you were 11?
Yeah.
When did you start keeping a journal?
When I started riding horses, like at 10, and I was going up and back to the ranch and the stables. And that was a whole exciting other life that was going on that was not happening in my family. Interesting characters, the big animals. I was riding and preparing the horses for the wrench string, and
I didn't know any part
young
of.
girls.
I didn't know anything about this, so we're going to have to talk at more length at another time about your home life at 3 to 11.
All right. Well, anyway, yeah. So this kind of became relatable in many ways, for me, not about what her particular secrets were, because that wouldn't have meant anything to me. But I got into real trouble because I was being introduced to things at the ranch that, like cigarettes, for instance, and beer and stuff like that. And my parents were not going to stand by for that, especially once they were reading it in my own writing.
That's a tough one. That's got to be a tough one for a parent to find a diary and then decide to read it and then have to act on their violation.
Yeah, it is. If you think it's hard on them, though, imagine how it was for me.
I can only imagine.
They did know. My parents didn't know how to be pretty good disciplinarians. They did. They could come down pretty. Did
I was going to say your mom
come down pretty hard?
Your mom was a statuesque woman and with a wonderful smile and demeanor. But my take on her as an adult looking back is that she didn't suffer fools gladly.
No, nor did my dad, whom you didn't get to know very well because he wasn't around a lot. He didn't. He didn't.
None of our fathers were around a lot.
I knew your dad pretty well, and I knew Neely, and I knew. I just.
Well, your dad was probably. He's very busy. I mean, he was on the board of a bank, and he had other
his own tie
obligations.
Yeah, right. That's true. But still, we missed him. So anyway,
that deep voice.
The thing is that in the show, the diary that that her big secret and the thing that she doesn't want anybody to read or should just die is she
uses a word actually, not die, that is very unusual for a child to use. Perish. I will perish. She says later in the show, I'll perish.
I'll just perish.
This is after she's already divulged everything that's in her diary that she didn't want anybody to hear about because she extracts a promise from Alice, I guess, and in similar fashion, because Alice has just admitted to Marcia that she's kept a diary her entire life, creating, I guess, safety for Marcia in then sharing with Alice what's in her diary.
Right,
which I thought was a stroke of genius because it makes no sense at all. And
Alice has a funny line in there when she's talking about this. She says that she kept a diary chronicling all of her romances over the past 20 years, but that was the shortest chapter in the book.
I didn't know that diaries had chapters, but okay, yeah. But
and then before Maureen, it might be just a separate section, romances. Marcia asks Alice, if she can keep a secret. Alice says, "Can I keep a secret? They don't call me Alice Clamup for nothing."
They were looking for another line. They just ended up with Clamup because they couldn't come up with any,
So, but while Marcia's still in the kitchen, she's talking to herself about her dream of dreams. Do you remember that? Her dream of dreams to be.
Well, this is because she does. I had to turn my volume all the way up to understand from the DVD what she was muttering when at the very open. Again, this show is about Marcia, and it does open on Marcia, proving Barry's theorem correct. But she's deep in the garage as the camera pushes in from afar, her muttering something as she's writing in this book, which we'll learn is her diary, about Desi Arnaz. And I had to turn up the volume. I don't have great hearing, but turn up the volume very loud to hear that it was about Desi Arnaz, that in fact they divulge it right from the very beginning. She then, in the scene that you're talking about, goes into more detail. And so what does she say now?
My dream of dreams is to be Mrs. Desi Arnaz Jr. She's like 12.
Well, this is my point. My point is she's up till this point, she's mortified that the book is missing, that she'll perish if other people read her private thoughts, and no one knows what those thoughts are. And she's absolutely livid at her sisters, who she assumes.
But we should explain a little bit about how all that happened.
Let's go down the chronicle order.
Okay, just to jump back. So she's put her diary back in her hiding place in the garage, but Mom is getting a box ready to give away all the books that we don't need anymore, and to donate them to a charity. So that book is outside, and she's handing it to the guy who is, collecting them, whose name happens to be Pat Patterson. I don't know him, but Pat Patterson. And a ball comes across the backyard and goes into the garage. She goes in to retrieve her ball and sees another book, which she gives to the collection man as well, which happens to be Marcia's diary. And then he is off to deliver it to somebody. And then Marcia comes out looking for her diary.
Right.
And discovers it's not there.
Before we go too far into the plot, because it's my job to pick apart our episodes technically, I guess this is where it's easier today to actually avoid this issue because of the way they shoot today. So today, though, the camera is no longer film and it is digital, you're able to watch it back in real time. So the director can actually see what's in the frame. Because being the cameraman, sometimes you're not paying attention to all the things that are in the frame. You're just paying attention to the frame and focus and that stuff. Because if you'll note, the way that Oscar directed this moment up front when Cindy's ball and her almost run into the garage, bringing Cindy to this collector man and Carol, her donating the books, we see the ball roll into the garage and stop. Clear as day in the frame. Now, the director wouldn't have seen that. He would have seen it with his own eyes, but he's seen a lot with his own eyes. He's not seeing exactly what is in the frame.
Well, let's be honest. Oscar Rudolph didn't always watch.
Oh, and then maybe he didn't always watch. He just trusted his cameraman would know what's in the frame. But maybe no one knew that the ball shouldn't have been seen to stop in the garage. But it just stops right there. You see where the ball was. And then at the end of this little repartee between Carol and the guy collecting the books, Cindy coming in, Carol then tells Cindy, your ball did roll into the garage. Of course, we saw that. Cindy almost made it all the way into the garage when she stops near Carol and the collector. But now we can clearly see that where the ball stopped in the garage. We cut to Cindy going into the garage to find her ball, and it's not where it stopped anymore. It's somewhere else. And that's what leads her to the diary. And the reason that it was left like that is because if you print with film, you don't get to see what's on it until the next day.
Right.
And they're just at that point hoping no one sees it. Just whistle, and just move on. Because you're not reshooting
I watched it twice, Chris, and I didn't see it, so I'm glad you pointed it out.
Sorry. I'm going to pick it apart for the technical issues that are there. All right, move on. So
now what's funny is Marcia, she's looking for diary, can't find it, and she has a little chat with Dad, right? Dad comes in. They have a nice little interchange, at the end of which Dad says to her, well, it didn't walk away by itself. Somebody must have taken it.
Right.
Well, that's just all Marcia, all the fuel and ammunition that Marcia's. She has fire in her eyes. And who does she blame first?
She storms into her bedroom and accuses Jan of taking her diary.
Jan, how could you? And she goes on and on and on. And Jan was doing a great job of blowing her off. It was great. Oh, Marcia, why would I possibly have any interest in your innermost thoughts?
But as soon as uttering that, she says, what is in your diary that you don't want me to read?
Yeah,
I mean, that's natural.
That's legitimate, though. That's a lot different than actually stealing it. So I guess...
so that's culprit number one. And she's not making any headway there. So next it's...
Oh, just want to say about Jan, this was a great reminder of that beautiful, long, natural blonde hair that Eve Plum had through that entire season. It really was like waist length.
Beyond waist. It was butt length. And, it was long.
And
required a lot of maintenance.
Yes, it did. And she received a lot of that from her mom. Would never went anywhere without a brush. And but it really, really was pretty.
It was. And she gets to play with it in this scene. One of the rare opportunities that she's actually on the hair in a scene. Anyway, so the next culprits in our plot that are going to be accused by Marcia are, of course, the obvious.
Her new brothers.
The obvious ones.
I got a copy of this one. We come into this.
It's a great little scene.
Yeah, it's a cute.
You know what
but I'm trying to think. I've got like 20 pounds here to lift, right? Like 5 pounds on each side, maybe 10 on each side, most. And it's a struggle. It's an effort. Now, do you think I was doing that to kind of show you guys, trick you, like it's really, really a lot heavier than it looks?
So
or I was just being
I
silly?
don't know, but the way that you lifted it looked like it was something light that you were trying to make look heavy, almost cartooning it up.
So that's what I'm thinking too, is that I was pretending that, because I mean, clearly I could have lifted that and put it down.
I mean, maybe you have another memory on this, because I would have thought that you would have entered the scene, if to do it the way that you'd want to do it would make it look easy or as hard as it is. Were you directed or have any recall if you were directed to make it look harder than it was?
I can only try and put it together from what I saw, and it looks really phony.
Well, I'm wondering if you were directed into that, because it makes more sense.
I'm going to go with that.
Yeah. I mean, you can lift something that's heavy and not have to struggle that much.
And also the next thing, and I think the joke that everyone was going for was that Bobby says, well, let me try, and he bends down and he cannot lift it up.
He can't even pick it off the floor, right?
Yeah, can't even.
Which is also not, I mean, you don't even see him get it up an inch or a half inch. Like he's also pretending to try to lift it. Yeah, so that was a little awkward.
So we dismiss Marcia, and she's gonna,
let's say so. Marcia comes in because it's a funny little scene when she literally throws the door open and bangs off the bed. She comes in to accuse us of taking her diary. Of course, before we know it's a diary, we don't know what she's talking about. So Peter asks Bobby, "Do you know what she's talking about?" Bobby asks Greg if he knows what she's talking about. Then Greg asks Marcia, "Do you know what you're talking about?" It was a funny little round, circle. And of course we don't. And then she says what it is, and she's going to close her eyes, and we can just put it back. And she, of course,
she's going to count to 5, right?
Count to 5. It's like we all just stand there and look at her, bemused. It's like, now open your eyes. Of course, she gets nothing and has to storm out.
But she remember, she opens her eyes with all sorts of anticipation, smiles, and thanks for putting it back, guys. And gee, I would go, okay, thanks. Yeah, I understand you took it, but at least you gave it back. And then the horror of realizing that nothing's there.
and that worked in this to make the scene humorous, but it also worked in the reality is they seem to have nothing to do with this. Like you could cross us off that list. There's only one next to inquire to.
Now, just as a little sidebar, as we go into the girls' room now for Marcia to confront Cindy, we've talked on several podcasts about Susan Olsen's sort of discomfort with the Cindy character. This is an episode that kind of demonstrates, the kinds of things that she was uncomfortable with. And so one of the things here, Cindy is asked to play this innocence to the point of, stupidity. And I'm sure it was hard for her because, of course, Susan's quite intelligent and she was very, very advanced for her age. And she's pretending like she doesn't know what a diary is. Or, she says at one point, Marcia says, you put all of your innermost secrets in it. And Cindy says, I don't think I've ever had an innermost secret.
Right. I mean,
to me, it's cute.
It is cute. But you can't continue to play that kind of cute endlessly.
Right.
And ultimately, they stretched it as far as they could to annoyance by making Cindy a device, a tool in the show out of her youth, which only later looked kind of uncomfortable, that she was doing things that a little kid might do accidentally when she was older than that age that would do that. But by her actions, there's a plot that a problem that then has to get solved in the 30 minutes that is the episode. They rely on her in a lot. I never realized how much that the Cindy character was relied on to trip off or create the problem that we will then have in an episode.
Secrets, tattletaling, changing the story, pretending to not know what was going on, all those kinds of devices that work conveniently for the plots. But
you can see in this character, they had a pretty clear idea what the youngest was supposed to provide, which was the cute baby sister. And in fact, I don't know if it was ever uttered after this episode. Again, this is our 22nd episodes. First season, nearing the end of the first season, but Marcia comes in and calls her my baby sister. And I'm not sure baby was, I mean, and I know that Susan had a problem with the baby.
I think that's when she was introducing Cindy to Desi at the end.
No, not my baby sister.
My baby sister?
Cynthia is how she's introduced in that scene. No, it's something to do with the checkers. Why wouldn't I want to, play with my baby sister or something like that? I was in the scene before she turns on Cindy again, but she calls her baby, my baby sis or baby sister. And I don't know if I've ever heard that from anyone else about the Cindy character, but that was what was in the minds of the writers, how the character was set up. And that brings to mind that, Hope Schwartz was Lloyd's baby sister. I've got to believe that part of the structure is born out of some reality that was close to Sherwood. We'll have to ask Hope if she remembers any of the Cindy behavior in her life, or doing the things that would cause Dad to ultimately, write that up and put it on an episode.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so where are we at the plot right now? Marcia is, mad. She finds out, she's asking Cindy. She's at the point of where now she wants to know if Cindy has seen the book. But she doesn't come at Cindy from the same place she did with her brothers and or Jan, purposely thinking that Cindy took it, but just asking if Cindy has seen her diary. And this is where she says, I don't know if I've seen your diary, because essentially she doesn't know what a diary is.
What's a diary? Right.
So, but then Marcia then describing it being a leather book, Cindy, says, I've seen it.
I gave it to the nice man.
Yeah, what
for,
nice
for
man?
A charity.
And now Marcia is flaming again. Those eyes are
distraught.
Now she hates her sister, will never talk to her again. So now Cindy is treated with disdain, because we now know who the culprit is. But being that Marcia's on the doorstep of becoming a full-fledged adolescent, we start to see some of these adolescent swings. Right. Go ahead.
And basically, Carol has a very, very good idea that she says to Mike, look, these books were only collected yesterday. Oftentimes, they don't get distributed right away or put on a shelf. So maybe you could just go to where they were delivered and the box will be there and you can find it.
Because so what do we know at this point? We know that Marcia's writing in a diary that about the love of her life, Desi Arnaz Jr. We know that the diary has been donated and is off somewhere, and that Marcia now knows that Cindy found the diary and unfortunately gave it to as a donation, not out of any malice. And the family's in a hunt. Mom, Dad are in a hunt to get this diary back, thinking at this point there's a good chance that they'll get it back. And Carol telling Marcia that Dad will find it. And Dad comes back.
Before we got that great scene with Mike at the store, the Friend in Need store, with Gordon Jump,
with another familiar face.
Well, familiar now. He was to become a regular on a very popular series, WKRP in Cincinnati. I think he was the manager, Arthur Carlson, it seems to me. Yes, Arthur Carlson.
Did Gordon Jump also play the Maytag repairman in a series of those? Because there's a number of actors that played that character, but he was also a face that I recall from 60s, 70s commercials. Like he worked an awful lot. He had that rubber face, I've always liked his work.
This is quite the exchange too, because
this is a funny one.
Mike Brady coming in looking for a diary, and Gordon, I don't know what
Mr. Collins.
Mr. Collins is saying, and thinks, right, mistakenly, that it's really Mike Brady's diary.
Yes.
And the diary he's keeping is about his mistress.
Right. Okay, so that's the first misunderstanding, which, is not being corrected for adequately enough, because then he says somehow it is determined that it's from a girl. It's a girl's diary. And then Mr. Collins thinks he's talking about his girlfriend. It's his girlfriend's diary. And you don't want the little missus or little lady to find that. I know what happened, blah, blah. And then Mike is spinning, no.
Right. He
then
says,
he goes,
no.
So that's bad enough. And then he says, no, it's my daughter's diary. And then he says, well, I've heard of his cousins and nieces, but never daughters.
Daughters, that's a new one.
You got to patent that one or something. Jeez. But it's done lightweight enough, I guess, to get by on a Brady episode.
Right.
But the two of them are having, some comedic fun in this scene, and it's nice to see.
At Target, you can find the things you need that also align with your sustainable goals and help you care for the planet. Target makes it easy to shop with the future in mind. With brands like Everspring, made with natural ingredients and recycled packaging, Target Clean Beauty products, formulated without chemicals and other harmful ingredients, and initiatives like Target Zero that offer zero-waste beauty solutions. All of these products are available at everyday low prices, meaning you never have to compromise what's important to you when you shop. Sustainable college essentials, from recycled packaging and zero-waste beauty, available at Target. Visit Target.com or head to your local Target store.
So anyway, he says to him, okay, he explains that the boxes come in and they immediately are distributed to various used bookstores. He rattles off 9 different stores that it could have been in.
And streets that they're on.
Yeah, in the street. Yeah, there's this one and that one and this one and that. And Mike is, overwhelmed. Needless to say, by the time he gets home, he hasn't found it.
All right, a little bone of contention here with the logic of this. So if you're the friends in need collecting book donations, aren't you distributing those books to the unfortunate?
Not necessarily directly, because they might use outlets to do that.
So they're making money on the books that sell, and then they get the proceeds from the books that are sold at a bookstore? They split the proceeds with the bookstore? Okay, maybe. I mean, maybe that's the way it works.
But also, the other stores may offer, special deals or things like that.
To people that come in.
May also be charitable, and I don't know. I mean, we didn't. Al Schwartz didn't, and Friedman. They didn't explain that one for us.
The friend in need is a retail establishment. All right, we set that up. All right. So Mike comes home because he doesn't have a store or 2 stores to go to. He's got too many to deal with. And he's a little dejected. And of course, then Marcia, she has been led to believe the dad's going to come home successfully with the diary, and he doesn't. And this turns Marcia then again off to Cindy. She wasn't mad at Cindy for a moment there when Mom had told her the dad was going to come back with a diary. Now all of a sudden he's back without the diary, and she's mad at Cindy again.
And so the brothers are there trying to console Marcia by wrapping up a new diary.
Very kind. And I thought that, it would have been a nice gesture. She's so young. There's so much more to write. I guess that's just my adult perspective.
When you're that, what kind of perspective have you got at 12? It's like your whole life happened in the last week.
Oh, so true. All right. So after Marcia treating her sister with these no trespassing signs in her room, and Cindy telling
another reason that Susan also was having trouble, because she comes in and says, well, Mommy, Marcia told me not to trespass.
What? What is that?
What is that? I don't even know what it is. How can I not do it if I don't even know what it is?
Right. I want to know what it is, so I don't do it. I don't know what it is. Carol's to the rescue and going to take care of the problem. Goes into the girls' room where Marcia's setting up signs that said, "Don't trespass. You know who. This is for you, Cindy.
You know who you are.
Yeah, you know who you are.
Don't touch this, Cindy. This means you."
And one of the greatest lines of all time, and Marcia utters that she's lucky that I even breathe the same air.
Oh boy!
That I let her breathe the same air as me. Murderous Marcia. Well, Mom has to take her down. This is where Marcia finds out from Carol that Dad is out finding the book, and what makes her then turn to be positive towards Cindy. We cut to Cindy, and then we find out
it becomes another attack, and now, because we know there are 9 different stores that it's spread out over, they break it up into Mom and Cindy and Dad and Marcia, and they're going to go off and divide the list.
But when is it that Alice has that conversation, this conversation with Marcia, where she divulges that in that diary is that she wants to marry Desi Arnaz Jr. She wants to be Mrs. Desi Arnaz Jr. I think she says something about that as she's mumbling or muttering, writing in the diary at the very front end. But now she says it. She admits to Alice. This is that scene that Alice and her have in the kitchen, where Alice shares that she kept a diary.
Yeah, that was very early on. That was very early on, before the.
Well, we missed a point of a very important plot point then, because what Alice
about
admits,
who she knows.
Now, how could I have ever watched this show and not believe that, in fact, it keeps coming back? We didn't live in Southern California. And I know why. It's because although I was deducing this by reading the scripts and or watching the show, every time I asked the question, I was told, no, we don't. And that has left me imbalanced because clearly we live in Southern California. In other words, you wouldn't know Desi Arnaz's housekeeper or Lucille Ball's housekeeper, and you wouldn't have Desi Arnaz coming over to your house. And there's a telltale sign in like every other episode that we live in Southern California. Though every time I went to Lloyd to verify that, I was told no.
I just like that all the housekeepers are like in the same club. Talking about their wealthy employer.
I think this would be like somebody writing a sitcom on an actor in a television show that's popular, and another actor from another show lives on the same street. Like they all live on the same street.
Right. Well, Raymond had that for a while, didn't he? With Lou Ferrigno being next door.
Well, didn't you had a famous star live next door? That's how you got your start, right?
Rosie Greer
lived next door to you.
Oh, no. Rosie Greer did live next door to me, but that was after the Brady Bunch. No, in Malibu. And when I grew up, Peter Graves, who was Mission Impossible later, but Fury at that time. Fury, a rancher with a horse.
Peter Graves was James Arnaz's brother. And James Arnaz was the star of Gunsmoke for 20 million years, 26 years or something.
Up until, a time, it was the longest running dramatic TV show on television.
Well, you grew up around these famous people. You must have known some high-powered maids. you all live next door to one another. So we learned this, and this is a point that I wanted to make, and the reason I'm bringing us back to this part of the show is we've just learned, and Alice, more importantly, has just learned that Marcia doesn't just have a crush on. Well, she has a typical crush on a television star, a celebrity, but that she kind of wants to marry him. Now, if I'm a parent, and I'm going to ask you because you are a parent, I'm just hypothetical here, and I hear that, I probably don't want to encourage it. I want to help her out without bringing it to another level. But that's what Alice does. Alice fixes this whole thing because now we're coming to this point where apparently she's shared some of Marcia's story with her friend, the housekeeper of Lucille Ball, who I would imagine that's where Desi Arnaz is living with his mom. And we see Marcia and Dad in the kitchen eating something. I couldn't figure out what they were eating initially when I was watching this.
Oh, it was ice cream.
It was ice cream.
Chocolate ice cream.
It made sense at the end. And there's
chocolate ice cream and milk.
That's a dairy. There's a dairy full there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a dairy festival.
Your local dairyman.
Well, you were going to ask a question though. Is that a good idea?
Would you have done that? Would you have brought over because we haven't introduced it in the plot yet, but Desi Arnaz comes to the house.
But would you have encouraged the crush is what you're really asking, isn't it? This is a good question. So let's back it up a little bit. Let's get sort of in a 12-year-old mindset, and a crush. Well, it could be a crush. Maybe it's a famous celebrity sports figure that you'd really like to meet. Maybe it's a musician. Maybe it's an actor.
Meeting is one thing, Barry, and I'm not talking about meeting. As soon as you start talking about being a life mate to somebody, I get it. She's only 11 or 10 in this, maybe 12 in this episode.
12. But what does being married mean? Being married is what every fairy tale is. It's happily ever after. That's what it means. So in her mind, I think that she's just thinking, he's going to love me, and I already love him, and then we're going to get married. I think it's as harmless as that.
Well, see, I'm thinking of it as like you're dreaming of happily ever after only comes if you meet Prince Charming, you know who he is, and then somebody says, "Oh, I can introduce you to Prince Charming."
But
kind of cements the happily ever after.
Yeah, but that's the part about the fantasy versus reality, and I think to introduce some reality into it, and make him a real person, and make him the gentleman that he portrayed is harmless at best, and really a very generous thing for her to do. So yes, I would do that. In fact, I have done that with my nieces and my nephews that have had crushes on actors that I'm working with, or I did a television show called S Club 7, and they were a musical group, and I played their manager for a year. And so, I had my nieces, come down to meet them, and they had crushes on the boys, but then you get a sense of that they're real flesh and blood, and it's reality, and that's where perspective and context starts to.
And it probably just moves along and moves out. Yeah, I think it's too young to cause any everlasting damage. But I thought it was, hey, that's I don't know. I mean, it's like I would leave it up to the parent, but it doesn't matter. It moved our plot along, and at this point now, there's a ring at the door. Marcia's eating her ice cream with her dad, at the lowest point in her life, and there's somebody there to see her. Of course, she's not all that interested.
Alice opened the door,
and then she says, "There's a gentleman. There's a
gentleman like to meet
and
you."
And then Marcia's eyes kind of light up, and it's like, a boy, not knowing it's Desi Arnaz yet, but the boy is enough to motivate her to actually walk out to the living room to find out who this is, and she's amazed to find out it's Desi Arnaz Jr.
in person in the Brady Bunch living room,
looking tan and happy.
I was not on the set for this. Were you?
I don't believe I was.
It was the scene included Cindy, Marcia, and then Mike, Carol, and Desi.
There was a part of the scene that we were all in, but I'm not sure. I kind of remember having met him, but not necessarily working with him. We only have that classic shot of us. This is the episode where there is a still of all of us at the top of the stairs, sort of like all kind of like.
Oh, that's right.
And all but Marcia and Cindy. Or was Cindy up there at that time? I don't remember. Anyway, but I don't know if at that point, even Desi
was even there.
Yeah, because
I do remember meeting him there, but it was not related to the show, and I doubt he would be there because that's our point of view where we were looking is where the cameras were.
Right. In any case, this is an adorable little scene where Marcia meets Desi, and Desi makes it okay to write your innermost feelings in a diary. And I thought that it was handled in such a subtle, wonderful way. I mean, it was a real deft touch in writing.
He said it was very flattering to have been included in
that's
in her
what
diary.
Being a celebrity is in part knowing that you're going to be in people's diaries, and something that he normalized for Marcia.
I also like that he came over. He had a button-down shirt. He had a tie. He was wearing a double-breasted sport coat, and it was looking quite dapper.
Yeah.
I was impressed. He was mature beyond his years. He really was. He acted like he was like 25, and he looked about 19, maybe.
And then I didn't do the research to find out exactly how old he was. Do you know? I mean, I've run into Desi a couple of times over the years, but I assumed him to be about 10 years older than me, which would place him about 5 years older than you, more than that.
I don't think
he's that old.
So.
I was 11 at this time. So he wasn't 21. So he's right in that 19. You looking it up?
Yeah.
Wikipedia says
he's a year older than January 19th, 1953.
So he was only 15.
Huh.
He was only 15 15 to 16 as we were shooting this episode. That makes sense because that's what kind of he looked. And he does have a presence of someone older than him, and that makes sense too because he was in tow with some very famous and powerful people all those years growing up. But let's come back to Desi. Let's just finish out the plot here. So this fine little interlude between the two of them talking about the diary, and as they're talking about it, in come Carol and Cindy, who we have found out earlier were at a bookstore. Mike and Carol had divided up the chores because Cindy knew what the diary looked like. Marcia knew what the diary looked like. Carol went with Cindy. Marcia went with Mike to all the various bookstores. They divided and conquered to find this thing. We catch Carol and Cindy at the bookstore that Mr. Thackeray, a bookworm, is working at.
Right.
And
wonderful character actor.
There's a bunch of books lying. OSHA would have loved his store, just in the way of anyone walking around that hadn't been organized or put on shelves yet. And those were the books that were donated to them from the organization.
Yeah. Now this bookstore that they were in and ultimately found the diary, that bookstore owner was played by, his name is Jonathan Hole, Hole. And what a prolific career he had over vaudeville. 50 years in the business, feature films, television. He was Orville in the Andy Griffith Show. But he had these. He was a character actor and created all these different characters. He was in radio. He was on Broadway. He was in television. Ultimately, movies. Worth looking up. Jonathan Hull, and it was fun to see. You can see his kind of his characterization, all his affectation, and I'm sure he would have been just a great party guest.
Yeah. He just had that old school sort of like
savoir-faire
air about him. Yeah.
Born in Iowa, I believe.
So anyway, we're at we're at the store, and these books haven't been put on the shelf yet, leaving hope for Cindy and Carol that they're going to find the diary. They go through all the boxes and they don't find it. And we think they're throwing in the towel. They find one more box, and Cindy doesn't want to throw in the towel. They find one more box, and they start going through it, and then Cindy says, maybe we should throw in the towel. We cut from them. We get to Mike and Marcia eating that ice cream. So the far end of that, though, now is Carol and Cindy come through the front door while Marcia is talking with Desi.
Mm-hmm.
And now she introduces her sister and her mom in a very weird little moment. First, Marcia introduces Cindy as Cynthia, and Mom as
Yeah, she couldn't remember her last name.
And
Desi says Brady, Mrs. Brady.
I just don't understand why that was a stumble and what was the use of it. But nonetheless, Marcia then needs to shoo them away, does very well. I mean, very realistically, like Cindy, go upstairs and play with your brothers and sisters. And Mom
now.
Yeah. Mom gets the hint and leaves Marcia and then Desi together for Desi to say goodbye to Marcia. But before that happens, Cindy slyly hands to Marcia the diary. And it's not dealt with. I mean, the whole episode is about finding this diary, and we don't see it get found at the store. And if there was a scene of it getting found, they decided to cut it out. And it's never really, it never has a moment to bring excitement to Marcia, because she's in this moment overwhelmed with just meeting Desi. He says goodbye by kissing her on the lips, not on the lips.
On the cheek.
That would have really been something. On the cheek.
On the upstage cheek. So it was probably
an air kiss.
Yeah.
Really.
At which point Marcia does what Marcia does, which is she puts her hand to her cheek, and the all famous, "I'll never wash this hand again."
This cheek again. Yes, and she swoons away.
Again.
She swoons away. And then, so the second theorem that is owned by me in this show is inconclusive. My theorem is that the show's tag, the tag is the last little scene of the show before the credits, will always be about or with the actors that supported the subplot. Mm-hmm. Insofar as this script didn't really have a subplot, we can't judge it to be wrong or right from this show, because it's Carol and Mike.
In another example of going over the top, it's now a week later, and we see Marcia coming in with her hand on her cheek still, crossing the living room and going upstairs still, without like she's not only not washed her cheek, but she has not removed her hand from her cheek, like she's trying to hold the kiss on her cheek.
Like she went to school this way,
Right.
Because a week it would have been school and everything included. Yeah, so Mike wants to know why Carol doesn't act that way when he kisses her. It's adorable. Carol then imitates Marcia, swooning at the kiss, saying that she'll never wash again. So that's our episode. Now, I got some questions for you. So Desi Arnaz, as I said up front, I of course knew who Desi Arnaz was, because everybody knew, that he was the son of Lucille Ball. And I think everybody watched the I Love Lucy show, and he was little Desi in some of the later years of that. But I don't remember him working as an adolescent, even as an older child. Do you?
No, I don't. Well, do you know Desi and Billy? They had the group for a while.
I didn't know, but they had a group.
They had a pop group. Mm-hmm. So they did that, and they did some music. I know that he lived a very comfortable lifestyle. I remember hearing that in high school he was driving a red Ferrari, and I don't know that to be true, so I could be contributing to a rumor. But people that knew him would tell me, things like that.
So he didn't need to necessarily look for work. I now, knowing what I know as an adult, I would have been looking around the set if I had this knowledge at the time we did this show to find who is with him. He has to have a guardian, right? Because now we've just discovered that he's under 18.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Who was handling him? I mean, was Lucy somewhere in the background?
Yeah, that's a great question. Who knows? Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I did not realize he was that young. So that's just about a year and a half, and it looks like at least 3 years.
Yeah,
difference.
Yeah, but he would have had to have a guardian. No, he would have to. He's under 18. He would have, he, like you, ultimately. You could have somebody else nominated as your
could it have been done in the summer? Yeah.
No, I think this episode, being the production number that it is,
it
was produced during the school year, and that's why I have very little recollection of the scene and of meeting Desi. I know we met him because they would always allow us that opportunity, but of course the memory is more available if there was more than just a handshake and a greeting. It's, if you work together, there's some of those memories are deeper, easier to access. So it must have been school that kept us from actually, talking at length.
So do we have a takeaway from this? I think we do.
I think that you just never trust the baby sister, I think, is the moral of the story.
No, I think that the moral of this episode is that, particularly in the land of Brady, if you do all the right things and you chase the right dreams and ideas, that ultimately everything will work out like a bow on a Christmas present.
There are no secrets. How about that? And if you keep
them, true too.
If you think you're going to keep them,
oh my gosh,
you're mistaken. How about that? Yeah. So you found out that there are no secrets.
Yeah, that also ended my diary writing for years.
Be careful what you put down on paper.
Right. Or in a text, in an email, on Instagram, or any other social platforming network, or even talking to your television, in front of your television for that matter.
I don't know if we ever have another episode where we get to use Alice's power friendships again, but
Sergeant Emma.
They could have done many episodes with all the housekeepers that Alice must have known.
All right. Well, I feel that we have exhausted this episode. It was great fun, great to revisit. I hope you all enjoyed listening in here to our meanderings and our takes on the show. We're going to be back next week with another show, and we haven't decided which one it is yet. So you can be surprised along with us. Thank you so much for joining us, and until next podcast, I'm Barry Williams.
I'm Christopher Knight.
And we are
the real Brady Bros.
Have a sunshine day, everyone.